Today's episode is in part brought to you by Patreon, and more on Patreon at the end of the video. Language learning is a lot of fun, and in my completely unbiased opinion, it is one of the best things you can do with your spare time. For the past 8 months, I've been subjecting myself to the art of le français. And needless to say that it was an absolute pleasure diving into some of the works of the original French writers. The process of learning the language itself is equally as fascinating as the process of making sense of the mother tongue of many French writers that I came to love. So in this video, I'm going to talk a little bit about my process of learning French and my process of diving into the language and my process of getting the most out of my learning experience. Keep in mind that I am in no shape or form a French expert. This is my 8th month tackling French. Et désolé, mon français n'est pas bon. All of the tips in this episode, take them with a grain of salt. If you want to learn any languages out there, if you want to learn something else, maybe take what I have to offer, run with it, see if it works. If it doesn't work, chuck it out of the window. Before we dive into the actual tips, there are 2 very important things that we need to talk about. The first thing that we need to talk about is that you have to have a very definite aim. Without a good aim, you can't really muster up the motivation nor the desire to learn the language, because learning a language, let's face it, is very, very tough. And really, based on what you want to get out of the language, having a definite aim will save you a lot of time. For example, for me, my personal goal is to read French literature in their originals. That means it's going to make a lot more sense for me to dive deeper into the grammatical structure, deeper into the literature, instead of practicing how to speak first. But for many other people, they're not exactly that interested in French literature. They're not really that interested in French culture. Maybe for those people, they need to dedicate more time to practicing their pronunciations and speaking instead of diving deeply into the French literature. Having a definite aim really gives you a direction, a sense of direction that you can start to focus your energy toward. So your process of learning is not dispersed. It's very focused. And the second thing now I have to talk about here is that if you want to learn a language, you absolutely have to practice the language on a daily basis. A lot of people make the mistake of getting really excited about learning a language and, they do way too damn much in the first week and they completely burn themselves out and not do anything for the rest of the year. Language is all about repetition, and if you want to keep up with your language learning, don't do too damn much on a daily basis. Set up a system, which I'll teach you how to do in a second. This is my own French learning system. Keep a very simple system that you can keep going with, that you can keep on deriving joy out of language learning with. Have a routine that you can sustain at least for 5 to 6 months or even a year. And you want to aim for consistency rather than stuffing yourself full of French in one day. And speaking of consistency, here is how I learn French on a daily basis. Now, I believe language learning has 3 stages: the technical, the contextual, and the social. When these 3 stages overlap with sufficient practice, you'll become a fluent speaker in that chosen language. The first stage, which is the technical stage, includes vocabulary and conjugation and grammar. These are the quote-unquote boring stuff that you have to learn in a classroom. Some language learning people, they think that this stage is not too important if you want to become fluent in the language. But in my own experience, I think it's really helpful if you have like a really slim foundation of grammar to build on. Here's my advice: learn just enough grammar before you do stage 2. Learn just enough grammatical rules that you can start to actually apply the grammatical rules to stage 2, which I'll talk about in a second. Stage 1 of learning grammar and conjugation and vocabulary can be pretty damn boring, so I wouldn't really recommend you to go out there and to get a grammar textbook and to labor through that thing like there's no tomorrow. That's a surefire way to kill off any desire to learn a new language because it's just too damn boring. Find alternative grammar practicing tools. Right now, I'm using Babbel on a daily basis on my phone. This video is not sponsored. I really love their service, and it's just one great language learning app, for French at least. And also currently I'm taking a French 101 class at university, so that also has a lot of grammatical components to it. So I've really got 2 ends of input for grammar and vocab. So after a few months of practicing basic grammar and basic conjugation, if you have a slim foundation of the French language, let's move on to stage number 2. Stage 2 is the contextual stage of learning a language. Language as a whole is a system. That means no one part is isolated from the whole. Therefore, context is crucial in understanding grammatical rules and understanding which word fits into which category and which word fits into which spot in a sentence. You can't learn the language through studying studying words, sentences, and phrases in isolation, you have to spot the grammar, spot the vocab, and spot the language in action in its original context. You have to really anchor the grammatical rules to practical examples in order for you to truly understand that piece of grammar. You can do this in a wide variety of different ways. For me personally, I like to read a page of a French novel every morning and to pick out words and phrases I didn't understand and translate them in isolation. And after seeing the grammatical rules in action, I'll take the same words that I've translated and construct my own sentences using the grammatical rule and the words. What this does is that it places everything into proper context. It puts the phrases and the words in isolation back into a very contextual whole. So this process right here is no longer a process of memorization. It becomes a process of really letting the language sink into your brain. Note that it is important that you complete stage 1 before stage 2, because without a minimum grasp of the grammar, of conjugation, and of vocabulary, it's going to be really difficult for you to spot the entire context. With an adequate understanding of everything, in stage 1, can you really do this contextual reading? Can you really fit all the rules into their overarching contextual frames? So after you've done a lot of contextual reading, after you've fully understood some of the grammatical rules that you've learned, let's move on to stage number 3, the social stage, or let's say the speaking stage of learning a language. Now it's time to animate the language. So a language is no longer just a collection of words on a dead page. I'm very fortunate to have a few French-speaking friends that I can practice with, and that's in some cases how I went about practicing pronunciation and how I practice greetings and how I practice conversations. But there are also definitely other ways that you can practice the social contexts, the conversational contexts. TV shows, podcasts, radio programs, you name it. The spoken form and the written form of the language are two completely different things. And to learn a language, it's not enough for you to just learn the rules on paper, for you to learn the context on paper. You actually have to attach the language into your everyday life. And the really cool thing here is that if you've done the previous 2 stages properly, this 3rd stage, as you're watching, for example, a French TV show, as you're listening to a French podcast, all the stuff that you've done in the previous 2 stages, they're gonna pop out. There's gonna be a certain word that you've heard before, there's gonna be a certain phrase that you've heard before. All these things are gonna start popping out. And then language learning becomes a process of recognition instead of raw memorization. And as you recognize more and more familiar sounds out of a TV show, out of a podcast, out of a French conversation, the more of a mastery that you're gonna gain over the language that you're learning. The 3rd stage is all about turning the theoretical stuff that you've done in the first 2 stages into something really concrete. You're taking language away from the dead pages into real life. And those are the 3 stages of language learning that I really had a lot of fun with over the past 8 months. So I'm really curious, which language are you trying to pick up? How are you going about picking it up? Leave a comment down below. That's all I have for this week, but before I get out of here, one major announcement. All the weekly videos and the newsletters, okay, you've signed up for the newsletter, thank you very much, but all of that stuff, this is perhaps only 40% of the entire operation. There are a lot of stuff behind the scene that I want to share with you guys. There are a lot of productivity tricks, there are a lot of esoteric topics that I just don't get to talk about on a weekly video. I really want to share those insights with you guys, and that's why I found an alternative way for me to share those insights. I wanted a platform where I can openly share those insights, and that is where Patreon comes in. By becoming a patron, you'll get access to exclusive episodes on productivity hacks and insights from books. In a recent post, I talked about Simon Beckett's play, Waiting for Godot, and how waiting for Godot, it's kind of like waiting for a package delivery from Amazon. Check it out if that's something you're into. Then again, thank you guys so much for all the support. It's absolutely blowing my mind. As I'm recording this video right now, we are at 28,000 subscribers. It's absolutely bonkers. And again, sign up to the newsletter for all the latest updates for this channel and for this project. And that's all I have for this week. Thank you for watching, and I'll catch you up next time.